Welcome back to AP World History. This is Chapter 29. We're looking at the period between the two great wars, World War I and World War II. Certainly is a lot of history being made. You won't be expected to know everything. There's too much stuff for a general survey class, but we just need to look at the high points. We last talked about the Soviet Union being formed, the communists taking over. Lenin will be in charge. He will pass away of natural causes, and Stalin will be placed, and he will come into power. Um, Certainly, he's going to be one of the most ruthless dictators in human history. Millions of people are going to suffer because of his rule. He's going to have many purges, cleaning out the military. Anyone who remotely stands in his way will be sent to a gulag or killed at slave labor. He certainly is anti-West. He wants to protect the Soviet Union communism. He sees the West as a threat to his government, and the West sees him as a threat. America doesn't recognize the Soviet Union until FDR comes into power as a president in the 1930s. He was hoping to stimulate trade with the Soviet Union during the Great Depression. You have to say probably the Soviet Revolution is one of the most successful in history. This group will rule for about 70 years. Eventually, the communists will be ousted in the Soviet Union. And now it's reverted back to Russia, and many of the different provinces are independent countries. Here's a picture of Joseph Stalin. Always portrayed himself as a strong man, a man of the people. Behind those eyes was a ruthless dictator capable of killing millions. Now we turn our attention to China. China, remember that the Qing dynasty, the Manchu dynasty, is going to be the last. Puyi will be the last emperor who will abdicate, and then China will fall into a period of civil war, different groups vying for power. Sun Yat-sen will head a revolutionary alliance, and he'll be elected in president in 1911. Eventually, he will resign, and Yuan Shikai, a warlord, will replace him as president. The Japanese are going to be flexing their muscle. Remember back the Sino Japanese War in 1895, 94. They won a decisive battle against the Chinese. Japan will enter on the side of the Allies, as will the Chinese. But the Japanese will do much better than the Chinese after the war. After the war, Japan will impose 21 demands, essentially reducing China to a dependent protectorate of Japan. The Chinese refuse. Yuan never accepts it. He rejects it. But again, he's going to be forced to resign in 1916. Japan will eventually solidify its hold in northern China, the Manchu area, because it was rich in natural resources, iron and coal. The May 4th movement was a resistance to Japanese encroachment in China. It was aimed to create a liberal democracy in China, but it never quite reached that goal. And it became clear to many of the Chinese that by just simply copying the Western democracies wasn't necessarily going to work in China. Other groups will emerge and seize power. The Nationalist Party will come to power. The Kuomintang Party, and they will rule parts of China. The nationalists will form alliances with certain groups. Although the real underlying problems for the peasants, land reforms, and a living is never really addressed, and they're not going to necessarily receive support from all groups. They form alliance with the communists, but really don't trust the communists, and they want to see them out of the country eventually. Chiang Kai-shek will take over the Whampoa Military Academy. He will be the next strong leader of the nationalists, and they will be opposed to the communists and warlords. So there's actually many groups vying for power. This is going to be a period of civil war and revolution, and eventually the communists will control the north. Manchuria, this area, this is in the 1930s. One of the things that the nationalists and the Chinese will band together is when China is being occupied by Japanese. So they will fight together. It will be an alliance similar to the United States and Soviet Union when they were fighting World War II. They fought against Hitler, but afterwards they will become enemies. And this is essentially what happens in China. The communists and the nationalists will break their alliance, and eventually the communists will prevail, and the nationalists will flee to Taiwan. Chiang Kai-shek, he wants to have a modern army. Certainly against the communists, will fight Mao Zedong, who will become the leader of the communists. They will march north, and he will become supreme leader of the communists, the Chinese communists. Turning our attention to elsewhere, during the 30s, there's certainly going to be a worldwide depression. People are going to lose their jobs. Particularly in America, it was an economic disaster. 25% of the people were unemployed. There didn't seem to be any hope for the future. President Hoover hasn't a clue as to what to do. FDR is going to be elected, and he's going to bring in a New Deal, trying to put food on the table. Much of what he tried to do was unsuccessful. In 1932, there was 25% unemployment. In 1941, there's still 25% unemployment. Certainly, the figures fluctuated, and there was food on the table, and people did make it through this period. But the root cause of the Depression is really not solved until World War II comes along, and then there will be full employment, and people will be working, having money to spend. Unfortunately, nothing to spend it on because there's rationing, and people will save their money. But this is the worst economic crisis, not only in the United States, but it'll also impact the rest of the world. It's just a collapse. People don't know what to do. The stock market loses its value. Businesses go bankrupt. People are unemployed. People are in soup lines. Interesting enough, the places that had the highest unemployment, and eventually many of these places are going to turn to people who say they can solve it. In Europe, Hitler is going to claim to the German people that he can solve it. And in fact, when he becomes chancellor and in power in Germany, he is going to put the German people back to work, and their economy is going to improve. And people are willing to listen to dictators as long as you can deliver. And he did. The Japanese fare pretty well during the Great Depression because their economy is controlled somewhat by the state, and they take quick actions to make sure that their people are going to be working. But it is an international collapse, and this is a situation ripe for dictators to come in and promise things, and many times they deliver. The Great Depression certainly was a difficult time for Americans, and FDR will claim that he has a New Deal. Some of the programs that he started are still in effect today, but many of them that were created to provide jobs did, but when the money dried up, so did the jobs. Causes for the Great Depression is certainly for debate. Some say the war debts, the spending, too much consumer credit. Agricultural sections struggled in a lot of areas, particularly the United States, because they had overproduced during World War I and bought expensive equipment and then weren't able to pay it off because and then after the war there isn't going to be as much demand for the product. Inability to pay loans, tariffs also a problem when you have protectionism, each country wanting to protect its own industry and creating higher prices. Certainly reckless speculation was part of it. It was a combination of a lot of different things, and it's going to take a World War II to bring us out of it. Certainly in October 29th, the stock market failed. Some people like to point to this as the beginning of the Great Depression. It probably started much earlier than that, a few years earlier, economic slowdown. But eventually people there's going to be too large an inventory, there's too much concentration of wealth, more wealth in the hands of the rich and not enough in the poorer and the middle class. Banks are going to fail. And the market really won't recover until World War II. Here shows people suffering, people moving from town to town, riding the rails, soup lines for people to get bread and a bowl of soup, get a cup of coffee, people looking through garbage, trying to come up with something, people selling apples on the roadside, trying to make it. European countries cut spending, increased tariffs, didn't seem to do much good. But the Nazis are going to enter. They're going to weather this, and they're going to get their economy moving because they're going to start building war equipment, building internal improvements, and getting people to work. The U.S. government in the New Deal actually starts a welfare program. They actually, the first time, start giving money to people who are unemployed, who are poor. Then they will regulate parts of the economy. They will try to start a cooperative between the business and labor and the government, the NRA, a National Recovery Administration, and other programs to get the people back to work. And I said before, unemployment will fluctuate, but in 1941 it was still around 25%. In 1932, at the height of the Great Depression, it was 25%. So 1 in 4. Germany's economy doesn't do well under democracy. It isn't going to be until Hitler and the Nazis come to power that things get turned around. So your pocketbook speaks louder than basic freedoms, apparently. And we're going to stop there, and we'll pick this up next time.